Woo! Everybody's here. All right. So, a couple of things. I'm recording here, so don't yell out curse words. How about that? I know none of you would do that. But what I want to do is talk about a couple of things that have happened. Hopefully, everybody had a good weekend. Anybody have a horrible weekend? All right. So let's talk a little bit about week 5 in here. Um, and if you notice, I put the due date. I moved the due date to the 13th, which is a Tuesday. Why would I do that? What is happening this weekend? Well, that's tomorrow. What's happening on the weekend? There is apparently some large baseball game or something going on, right? So, I don't know what it is. No. No. So, I figure that Sunday nobody is going to want to do homework and get stuff done. So, I moved it to the 13th. Monday tends to be kind of a horrible day, so I just moved it over there. So before you come into class, make sure you get these items done. So I made it a little shorter, a little less things, and I'll show you a couple of things that we're talking about. So we've looked at, and I just kind of thought this was kind of interesting. We've talked a lot about this idea of ransomware and where things happen. So one of the largest children's hospitals in the United States got attacked, bringing them to, they're still serving patients, but let's think about this. So not only did they lose all their, they have 4,000 people there that are working there. Wow. So they provide care to 200,000 children. And we have people who are so cold and callous, they just want to make money on it, right? And it took them a couple of days before they responded and said, this is why, and this is what's going on. And they haven't released a whole lot of details yet. I think at the end of this, we're going to find out some details. But I'm almost scared because right now what they're wanting is ransom. They're saying, I want money for what we've done. But what if, instead of ransom, because we have all your data, ransom, or we're going to inject random errors into your system and you won't know if your medical orders are right or not. And so now you have people being prescribed the wrong medicines. Could that in fact be deadly? So the fact that they picked a children's hospital seems a little frightening, but hopefully it does not impact severely anybody's care, but it's a little frightening. And that's that idea of ransomware. So there's other ones that are out there. So if you haven't ever been to this site called the Bleeping Computer, there's a lot of information on the Bleeping Computer about not only cybersecurity, but viruses and all different kinds of pieces in there. It's an interesting website if you want to go down some rabbit holes. So I saw that and I thought, hey, let's bring that up. Let's talk about it. Let's look at it. Well, what else happened in the last couple of days? So, federal agencies must remove the affected software by the end of today because, oops, we were using software that's supposed to increase our security. VPN software that's supposed to create secure tunnels from one place to another. Son of a biscuit, they're hacked. Son of a biscuit. I could say that one. So, great. So now the federal government is saying, oh, if you're a federal agency, you have to completely take everything off and start over essentially. Wait, they also sell to other customers. Should those not be concerned a little bit? So what that is, they had all these errors and then they said, oh, now we're going to exploit them. Great. All right, well, that frightens me, and that's a kind of an honest mistake, I think. Did they know about the errors? No. And as soon as they did, they started to fix them. This one, I think, this story I found is a little more frightening. Does anybody in here have an iPhone? A lot of you. I do. I have one. And, oh, Government-sponsored hackers. 3 vulnerabilities target victims with spyware, and it was a European country that started that. Great. So now there are companies that are exploiting these vulnerabilities. So in this case, it was specifically targeted. But if we can target Apple phones in Europe, do you think we can do it here? Do you think our federal government is above using something like that on you? Huh. Hopefully you never do anything that involves your name being public where you might be in a political issue. So, other places that we're seeing some interesting things. The federal government, FBI, different agencies, state agencies have bought from several companies software to crack an iPhone. So one of the things with an iPhone that has been interesting is Apple has been very robust in its defending its users. And I waffle a little bit. If it's, a terrorist about to blow up a building, great. It'd be nice if we could find out what's on their phone. But the flip side of that is, how much do we value our own privacy and our own rights? So, but what we found out is that the FBI is just hiring companies, for example, out of Israel and other nations that have been able to crack and break some of these pieces of software. So I thought that one was kind of interesting that all these come out. So our hospitals aren't safe. So hospitals aren't safe. Great. So one of the places they've also started coming after with this ransomware is schools and hospitals. Why are schools and hospitals kind of vulnerable? Do schools have really high IT budgets so they can have IT defense? No, typically not. What about a hospital? They're spending their money all on software to hopefully help people. The fact that we have to spend these resources is kind of sad. Oh, we could cure cancer, but we got to spend it on cybersecurity to keep people from stealing our money. It's a little frightening there. So this week we're going to look at where do we find some of this intelligence, because I think it's important that you find some viable sources to find where these things are coming from, what's going on, how do I prepare myself? And again, even if we're a billion-dollar company, we won't necessarily always be able to stop every attack. I'm going to guess the Children's Hospital in Chicago has probably a pretty good IT team. And they probably buy really good products. And they have all these things in place, and yet what happened? They got hammered anyway. So sometimes we can't just buy our way out of these kinds of issues. So did I put it? There it is. Almost see it. Maybe down there. All right. So I want to look at a couple of things here. So I want to figure out where we can find sources of information, valid information, how we can do some securing of our endpoint, how we start to create our own idea of SecNav or SecOps or some security development. So one of the things that is kind of enlightening is a lot of organizations, large organizations, are pooling their data. So if IBM is getting attacked by Russian hackers, well, maybe other companies are too, and we can pool that information. So there may be data available from multiple companies on like a dashboard where you can see, hey, we see attacks coming from these IP addresses in Croatia. So how do I share that information? Our federal government starts sharing information and we start pooling resources together. Because quite frankly, if we can attack nearly anything in the world, we're going to have to do that resource sharing. other people know what's going on. So it might be nice to just bury our head in the sand and say, we didn't have anything happen. But what we can do is use these, and if we have them set up where that we can exchange data from company to company, different types of industries. So in other words, we come up with common methods of exchange. So one of those things, you guys, some of you have, or if you haven't yet, you will take an HTML course. Well, one of the offshoots of HTML is XML. So XML is being able to build those containers. That's how we send data information back and forth, is in these created XML containers. So, a couple of terms. Open source. And the first thing when I think about open source are pieces of software. So things like LibreOffice or a Linux operating system, stuff we can use. Well, we're really using it also with information. It's information that we can utilize. Some information is proprietary, or we may not be able to use it unless we subscribe to a service for it or we pay for that resource. So the idea of open source is a little bit radical in this model, because I guarantee every antivirus company out there and every security firm, they'd love to contain all this information to themselves and then sell it to you. So open source. So because we don't have enough acronyms in our life, we're going to ignore the acronyms for right now. So there are collaborative programs where we share information. It's free. We also will share with other companies. If we detect malware, we will bundle that up and ship it off to multiple vendors so that more than one set of eyes can look at things. So things like, if you go all the way back to Stuxnet, it went to several different vendors. It wasn't one vendor, but it was a multitude. So there are problems with this idea of open source. And one is the idea, if this information is all out there for free, why can't the same people who are writing these pieces of code use it against them? And I think that's a fair assumption. So we have to be very careful about what data we do send. If we send a lot of data about our own structure and our own makeup of our company and what's in play, we actually could make ourselves more vulnerable by trying to become safer. And I know that's a weird way to look at it. So sometimes the idea of speed becomes an issue with open source, because it does rely on people and groups of people, and in some cases it's volunteers or somebody at a company like Google that works on a job where 80% of the time you're working on your main job and 20% you're on whatever other types of tasks you would like to do. So what they've come up with, and again, this is really the same idea of XML, but they call it taxi. It's over encrypted connection. Hopefully, we can exchange that information. It's consistent, and it can create some areas where we can be better. In other words, we know what's happening. We know where these ransomware attacks are coming from. We can figure out ways to harden ourselves from them, or we can figure out how to stop them before they. So the opposite of open source is the idea of closed source. So closed source groups have formed. So maybe somebody name an antivirus company. Avast gets together with IBM and maybe another company in Harvard University, and they say, we're going to study this, but we're going to keep all the information to ourselves. So it benefits those organizations. The information is more secure. Okay. And there are some things where this is much better at. So I don't think you're going to find the CIA disclosing their information system vulnerabilities on an open source platform, right? So there's usually some kind of a process where companies, organizations that want to join these groups, they get very carefully investigated to make sure that it really is who they are and who they say they are. They will sometimes have to do some certificate work. What we're saying though is that it's a very closed group. Now, can they get information from the outside? Yes, but they don't necessarily share information that they've captured until much, much, much later, because it may have some value and it may not be applicable to other companies. So, where do we find some of these things? So, all spread out over the World Wide Web are all different kinds of pools of information. So, one of them that you may find, depending on what product you're looking at. So, if I'm looking at Microsoft products, there are multiple websites with databases behind them of all the vulnerabilities that have been discovered in Microsoft, and they're growing every day because we find more and more vulnerabilities. They're similar to Mac. Although Mac is better in some ways, it too has vulnerabilities. So there's all kinds of places where we can pull different vulnerabilities. We use it sometimes when we look at a computer and we go, man, it's unpatched, and that's going to allow CVE 1337 to be exploited. Sometimes geography makes sense to us, and we can look at threat maps. So most of us are visual learners. Does anybody in here like looking at Excel spreadsheets all day long with just numbers? You're an accounting major, aren't you? Yeah. Okay. So some of us do. We nerd rage over Excel spreadsheets and columns of numbers, but other people don't. So sometimes the idea of graphically mapping things makes a lot of sense. So we'll take a look at one here real quick. So all these code repositories. So if I go to Avast and their website, or I go to almost any of the antivirus makers, cybersecurity firms, very often they're going to have repositories where you can upload files and say, oh man, this file is infected. I'm going to upload it for you guys to study. Well, that's pretty cool. So that's where things like Stuxnet have got uploaded. Now, granted, Stuxnet was a long time ago. Didn't we have this nebulous term, the dark web? That sounds scary, doesn't it? And we hear tales about the dark web. What do we hear tales about the dark web? What do we hear goes on there? Illegal stuff, child porn, anything else? Drugs? What else goes on in there? Illegal bot and control hacks and all different kinds of stuff. So, we'll talk about the dark web here in just a second. But the dark web isn't as frightening. So, when we say dark, what it really means is it's not indexed and I can't go to it from a Google search necessarily because Google hasn't indexed those. So there can be sites on the quote unquote dark web that aren't harmful at all. But it's gotten a reputation, and part of the other thing that happens with the dark web, or as we call it, that nebulous area, is we start using some interesting ways to get around other organizations. So we use things like Tor browsers, which distribute the way you're searching in a lot of different layers. So we will explore a Tor browser in here. So, but not today. So there is a security map, and this one's by a company called Checkpoint. So this is saying, oh, these are the big threats going on today. And it will change. So they kind of have a network operations center, and they will publish out what are the big threats today. So, and again, graphics sometimes make it useful. We can see where things are coming from. So quite often, I'm going to see that attacks are really coming out of, there's a country over here. See where India's at? There's a country to the right of that. What is that big country to the right of India? China. What we're finding out is China is using a lot of nation-state cybersecurity professionals to try to find vulnerabilities, find ways to get into our systems. But I'm going to say this. If I go over to England or Ireland that they're showing there, are they doing the same thing as a country? Yeah. Is Israel over here doing the same thing? Yeah. Is Iran doing the same thing? Yeah. But the world's policemen, the United States, we don't ever look at offensive capabilities, right? No? You don't think we have state-sponsored hackers right now attacking other countries? Oh, yeah, we do. We have them all over. But we'll gloss over that because it's everybody's doing it. Maybe it's okay. So this just kind of illustrates the visibility of some of this. So out in the clear web, if I can get to it with a browser really easily, man, that's pretty easy to do. If I have to do some digging in, so maybe it's subscription, maybe it's databases that I have to find, maybe it's something like LexisNexis I need a subscription to get data, or any of our subscription stuff you see over at our library or other libraries. That's that next level. And then finally down here, the dark web. So the dark web, as we kind of keep thinking about it, are individuals that want to transfer information, collect information, sell information, gather things, and they want to do it illegally. So transactions happen down there, and until recently, what did most of those transactions happen with? Did people get real dollars, bitcoins, or other types of cryptocurrencies? And we've had some. So if you go back and you look at the history of something called Silk Road, so Silk Road was an organization that was managing to, if you wanted to make drug trades, you could do it on there. If you wanted to, have human trafficking, because you needed 100 girls, 14 years old, to put on the streets of Portland, Oregon, for sex trafficking, right? No, okay, good. But those things were out there, so it was really, really, really frightening. So how we find that information and how deep that information goes and where it goes. So Peru has actually been the victim of not necessarily the deep web or down in the dark web, but there's a lot of information about Peru State that is behind our website that we don't actually publish. So it's sitting behind there, and pages are published out about it. So indicators about students, our population of students, because if I want to compare schools, I want to be able to do that. So some of this data they call IPEDS data, and we have to make it available to other researchers. Why do we want to research what our students are doing compared to what other universities are doing? Why do we care? What kind of things might be interesting? Groups, trends? If I look at, and maybe what I'm interested in, did anybody in here get a 36 on your ACT? No? So the governor just announced we got a new scholarship. If you get a 32 on your ACT, you're an in-state student. We'll pay for your 100% of your college and give you $5,000. Do you know how many people last year got a perfect ACT in the state of Nebraska? 32. So is that scholarship really that relevant? Because if you got a 36 on your ACT, you might decide I'm going to go to MIT or Harvard or Stanford or somewhere else, right? But what I do maybe want to look at is I want to look at Peru State, and I want to compare it to Wayne State or some other college. And one of the things I might be interested in, because I know that one of the keys for success is financial ability to afford college. If you're having to work 75 hours a week to try to pay your tuition down, is that going to affect your ability to go to college? Yeah. The other one we look at is Pell Grants, because Pell Grants are another step down typically in income. We can look at those numbers and we can make comparisons. We can say, oh, so if I look at Peru and 75%, I'm just making this number completely out of my head, 75% of students at Peru got financial aid, and of that, 55 got Pell Grants. Does that paint an economic picture of our college? Okay, so we want some of this information available. Unfortunately, to put it in our database on the backside, it was available if people knew how to craft a web browser to see all kinds of other individual pieces. It's a long way to go around to get there, but we had stuff that was sitting down here. Yes, it's information. Yes, it's interesting. But maybe we don't need it completely as accessible as what we do. So sometimes, though, I think we have the flip side of that. So if I go to UNL's website, can I find the salary of everybody at UNL? I can go figure out what my wife makes. They're public employees. We can figure it out right away. That's kind of handy. Peru State, we can also find it out, but we got to go digging through all kinds of records. They haven't made it as available. So that information is a little harder to get to. It's still out there, and you can go see what I made last year or what my contract was, whatever. But that information's out there. So how do we dig down, and then how do we get to that deep, dark layer? And that's one of the things we want to experiment in here. So we're going to talk about we're going to go inside out. So the endpoint. So that's your computers, your phone, whatever devices on that end of our network. Does that make sense? So we're at the very end of our network. And so we want to talk about this term endpoints that has become very, very popular. So, very first thing we have to do is we need to make sure that the computer started securely. Well, what do you mean started securely? Surely there's not pieces of code or other ways that we could hijack that computer before it even starts and finishes its start, right? There is? Okay. So we have to protect that computer while it's running from attack. And then it'd be kind of nice if we could make it as idiot-proof as possible. So, a couple of really easy things. Do we give everybody in a corporation administrative access to their computers? In other words, they can just install software willy-nilly? No. Because if they can install software, they can click on web links and install software. So some of these things make more sense when we start thinking of it. But again, it's always that trade-off. Betty Joe Bob in the office is probably mad because she can't install her free screensavers, right? Oh my goodness, it's going to be Easter soon and I need the Easter screensavers. Well, I don't know how Betty Joe Bob got kind of a fake Irish accent there, but what I'm trying to say. So, secure startup. So even your computer, and I am as guilty as anybody, but I call it BIOS. The very lowest level of your computer. When you turn on your computer and it's scrolling across that black screen and it's showing you it's doing things. So below Windows or Linux or Mac, there is this pieces of software that allow that to all function. So one of the things that they've done is they've now got UEFI. So UEFI is this new way to do things that is supposedly, but not always, more secure. So many companies build some additional protections right in when that computer starts. So if I buy an HP on the business line, I can actually they have I think it's Sure Start, and so it checks that image that's loaded in there. So there's software underneath the software, and it checks to make sure that it's the right software before it finishes loading. So this BIOS, this UEFI, can be corrupted, and it's hard to get rid of it if it's corrupted. So UEFI does some other things that are really good. Bigger hard drives. It's supposed to be faster. So it's really just kind of an evolution. My brain still calls it BIOS. It's that screen that comes up when you first turn on that computer. So when we start up our server back there, you'll see it scroll for 10 minutes. That's what we're looking at about. But notice here, what do they call it? UEFI BIOS. So this is that, and this actually looks really similar to what your computer would look like, or mine, up here. So this is where we have those very bottom of the level controls on our computer, all the way from like temperature regulation, what the fans are doing, and I can set up, different speed profiles and all different kinds of things in there. So this typically will verify that that image, that file that it starts from, is correct. If it doesn't, it'll tend to scream a lot and tell you about it. Well, one of the problems we have is I want to be able to update that software. I want the latest updates from Dell or Microsoft or whoever built my computer for Mac. But because we can update it, I have to make sure that I'm updating it with actual valid files. I don't go off into the wild web and find, hey, this says it's the right file. Let me try to do it. So what we want to do is go all the way to the idea of hardware. And in fact, if you have an older computer and you've tried to install Windows 11, one of the things that you will get as an error is, oh, you don't have a TPM chip installed, or it's not TPM 2.0. And that's this trusted platform all the way down at the hardware level. At the very bottom, we have this trusted piece that we have to deal with. That's good. That really is good. So we've got it all the way at the bottom level, and now we're going to install our BIOS updates or our UEFI updates. Those are known to be good, and now, hopefully, our computer is going to start up okay. So, computer starting up, whether it's a Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever it is, now we're at the second level. So now, the computer, the physical parts of the computer are all turned on. We need to run the software that then is going to present to us that operating system. So that operating system is going to start churning away. And so even though our UEFI BIOS or our old style BIOS or whatever it is are okay, we think we can have other places that there is malware or other things that are going to happen. So typically one of the things we do with almost any corporate style or business style computer is you run an antivirus program. So that antivirus program in most cases loads before Windows, or pieces of it do. So what it looks for is file-based things. It looks inside a memory that sees, oh, hey, I've seen this before. So there's a couple of different terms you see in there, signature-based. In other words, I've seen this model before. And behavior-based or heuristic. So in other words, your computer starts doing something, and the software goes, oh, hey. Nope, we're going to stop that. It doesn't necessarily look exactly like last month's attack, but why are we opening up channels and sending data to Croatia or some other country? So that's kind of that antivirus piece that it's in there and that does. So other things that we might do, so we might put in a hardened browser that has certain restrictions on it. We might monitor where that browser goes. So our antivirus software can often do things like that. We can monitor where you're going. It creates log files we can look at later if we do have an intrusion. And we're paying this company, so whoever it is, I think somebody threw out Avast earlier. So Avast is a company, and on their corporate side, if I'm using their product, it'll do a lot of things for me. Their software will send me a text and say, hey, client 337A laptop has an infection. And it'll even let you do things like shut it down remotely and just kick it off the network. Well, that's pretty cool. But are these infallible? It's always a race. So you have the hackers and you have the good guys. Well, the hackers are always going to be a little bit ahead because they're the ones creating this software, this evilness that they're doing. So somebody has to catch it, spot it, see what it's doing, and go, oh, I'm going to grab it. So one of the new things that a lot of antivirus pieces are doing is they are actually doing what's called sandboxing, or what we're going to talk about, creating virtual images of computers and that they're running. So a lot of new software, when it runs until it's verified that it's safe, runs in that sandboxed environment. So it's really, your antivirus is spooling up a small little virtual machine, running it inside of there. And that way, if it tries to do anything malicious, it just shuts that virtual instance down. There are some people that are super paranoid, and they run their entire computer system on virtual images. So the computer boots up in Linux, Windows, whatever, and then everything they do is based on a virtual image that they load up. That way, if anything goes wrong, guess what? We stop it, and I just relaunch that program from 20 minutes ago or whatever time I wanted to do that. So antivirus now has that ability, something called sandboxing. So one of the worst things to deal with. Does anybody here love getting their spam mail? No. And in fact, some of it is so outrageously horrible. Some of it's well crafted, some of it makes you wonder, and then there's some of it you just go, holy crap. So the Russian girls are not really wanting to meet you guys, just so you know that. Or Russian men. They're not really wanting to meet you, I'm sorry. But how do I determine if that email is good or bad? What kind of things do I look at? Spelling. So, but what if it looks like it comes from somebody I know and they can't spell? No. And I have a really interesting, and we can talk about that, but I have an interesting theory about the spelling thing. So, we have to come up with some way to look at it. And sometimes we look at words in it. So, can I block a lot of it by using a word-based filter? Yeah. So if I block all the 7 dirty words, right, I can catch some of them. And maybe I add other words in there. But I will tell you, doing some work in a hospital, we had to open it back up because one of the words, is everybody in here over 21 and an adult? Perfect. All right. So, the word boobs. It's at a hospital. Well, one of the nurse practitioners, that's how she referred to him in emails. And we kept stopping her emails going out. We had to restrict and relax some of those because of that particular setting. So medical terms we had to expand out. So we couldn't just exclude one because it had the word penis in it, right? Ah, crap. All right. So it makes it harder depending on what your target audience is, where they're going, what they're doing. But some